Hello everyone, and welcome to another Hammer tutorial. This time, it's an introduction to lights and props. We have a lot to cover in this video, but before we do that, I now have all the tutorial episodes in a playlist. Feel free to use that to help you with this map editor. It's incomplete now, but it will be complete and finished one day. Anywho, let's talk about the types of lights and props. This can get complicated, but you can always rewind the video or ask me questions in the comments or my Discord server. Anyway, let's jump into this tutorial now. Now that I'm done with the intro, the way you spawn in a light is pretty simple. Just place down an entity and change the class to a type of light. There's a lot into this topic, but the Valve Developer Wiki exists, and if you want to, you could read more about it there. But we'll go over 4 entities for this episode that you'll need later on. Also, if a type of light you use can point into a direction, you could simply rotate it the same way you'd rotate a brush. The way you'd rotate anything in Hammer is by clicking the object with the selection tool till you see the swirly arrow icon. Click and drag till you've rotated to the position you'd like. Anywho, let's talk about lights now. First up is just called light. The basic light entity is just, well, basic. It lights up the area surrounding it, and you can also adjust the color of it via an RGB value in the class entity options. Also, the fourth option in the RGB value is the light's intensity, and there's also a convenient color picker. But that's not going to have everything you may want, so you should get used to using it without the color picker. Next up is light_spot. Think of this type as the last one that we talked about, but instead of just lighting up an area around the entity, it lights up in a cone shape, which basically means it points into a direction. The way you could change the color is also the exact same, but we'll leave it for white for now. Hey, this is future me here. I forgot to mention that you could also adjust the cone, the shape of the cone that comes out of the light. There's like 2 angles that I'm showing on screens, like inner light and outer light or whatever it's called. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But yeah, that's how you adjust it, and the number value is bigger or smaller depending on what you want it to look like. Just thought I would mention that. Also, if you're following this tutorial from the last episode I made on the Hammer editor, I'd recommend you expand your room so the lights don't get all close to each other. We already made a video on that though, so if you happen to need a refresher, go watch that video. Anywho, the next light entity we'll talk about is the light_environment entity. This is a directional light cast that is used as sunlight. This will take care of all outside lighting for you. It will cast off the skybox textures you have on your map, and you can also control the angle of the sun via the settings of the entity. However, I'm only going to mention it because it's a light entity. We'll go over how you use this in a video dedicated to 2D and 3D skyboxes. Lastly, I'll talk about the ENV projected texture entity. This is essentially dynamic lights, and they're pretty good at what they're supposed to do. For example, if you have a ceiling fan that's constantly running, this entity will make sure that the light around it in the area works flawlessly, aka it's not just baked in and it will dynamically spin to the light's environment. That's pretty much all the stuff you need to know right now. We will talk about this more in a future video, but I also highly encourage you to go to the Valve Developer Wiki and look at it yourself, assuming if you're still interested in this. I know you can read, and it's a way more in-depth description of how lighting works in the engine if you really don't want to wait for another video. Also, the name of the compiler that the source engine uses for baking lights, or just lights in general, is called VRAD. So now you know what VRAD is if it ever pops up in the compiler. Anyway, let's talk about props now. The way you spawn in a prop is very simple. All you have to do is put down an entity and change the class to a type of prop. We'll talk about 3 prop types in this episode, however we will probably go more in depth on different prop types in a future tutorial. First up is prop_static. These are models that do not have physics properties or can't be animated. However, they do have light mapped shadows and can have collision properties. Also, if you happen to not know what a light map is, light maps are a form of pre-rendering and calculating lighting on objects in a level. Next up is prop_physics. This is a simple one. It's an object, but with physics. You'd probably use this stuff for like barrels, small debris, furniture, etc. It's simple, however there's also a multiplayer variant. The only massive difference between these two is that the multiplayer entity is more optimized for online play. So if you're making something that will be played with others, use that one instead. Finally, let's talk about dynamic props. These are props that not only cast dynamic shadows, but are animated as well. It's also usually used for stuff like robotic arms, machinery, or models in cutscenes. That's really the simplest way I can explain it. However, when you spawn in a prop entity on your map, it will be this red dot of sorts. But we can change that. Let's change the model for this entity by double-clicking the World Model option. From there, you can type whatever you want. If the model is in the game files and mounted correctly, it should work pretty much flawlessly. We will go over custom assets in a future video, so for now, let's just use something that comes with Half-Life 2. Once you find something you like, just press OK, then hit apply. From there, it should show on your map. I hope that's enough knowledge to give you an understanding of how and what to do, but let's give you a test and see if you have done it properly. Firstly, I'll put down a basic light, which is as simple as putting down an entity and changing the class to a type of light. Next up, 96 or 120 hammering units from the first light, I'll put down a light underscore spot entity. I'm simply separating them in a hallway of sorts so you can kind of tell the difference between how different lights look. Finally, I'll put down an ENV underscore projected texture so we can look at some dynamic lights. Next, I'll put down a static prop, a physics prop, and a dynamic prop. Also, I'd put the dynamic prop under the projected light texture, just so you could see how it is when picking it up under a dynamic light. It doesn't matter about the model, so long as you can pick it up, that's okay. Now let's compile our work and see in Engine. And there you have it. I hope you learned some things in this video. If you need help with anything, feel free to join my Discord server or come ask me stuff in my comment section, or when I'm live on Twitch. Have a nice day, and be sure to subscribe and save your work.